AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Brett Johnson with you here on a Tuesday afternoon. And if you take a look at the calendar, we are getting towards the stretch run of the Minnesota legislative session, as the last day of session is coming up on May 20th. Although I should point out on May 20th, they're not allowed to pass any bills. So they only have just a few days left to get things done. And we thought, well, who better to talk about the end of the legislative session than Patrick Coolican, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer, a great resource for the latest in Minnesota news and politics over at minnesotareformer.com, as we will indeed be talking about the end of session, as well as some other news as well that they've been working on, and possibly also highlighting a column from Aaron Brown that is talking about the influence of lobbyists. So lots to get to today, and Patrick, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So let's start off talking about what's happening with the end of session, and I want to talk about some of these GOP legislatures GOP filibusters, I should say, that we've been seeing over the past couple of days at the legislature. And let's start off talking about the Equal Rights Amendment, because DFLers would like to see that amendment put up to a vote in 2026, where Minnesota would be one of the states that passed the ERA. So I'm curious, where does this stand right now? Because as I understand it, the GOP launched quite a filibuster against this earlier this week, with mainly contending that they want a religious exemption into the ERA. So I'm curious where we're at right now with the ERA at the legislature.
So the Minnesota House was supposed to take it up last night, and they ran out of time because of a Republican, I don't know if we want to call it a filibuster, but prolonged debate, let's put it that way, on a different bill that was seeking to ban what we've come to call junk fees. And the problem is that for Democrats, that the number of legislative days is now dwindling. The session is over, as you mentioned, on the 20th, but due to a constitutional wrinkle, they're not allowed to actually pass any bills on the 20th itself. So Sunday is the last day, and there's also a limit on the number of days that they can actually pass stuff off the floor. So it's looking a little tight, and I don't know exactly where it is on their list of priorities, but as for now, we're in a bit of a holding pattern on the Minnesota ERA.
Well, let's talk about this junk fee bills that, of course, Republicans also wanted some, as we'll say, extended debate on. As I understand it, they spent at least about 7 hours basically filibustering this consumer protection bill that would ban junk fees. Because, of course, as I saw on Twitter, people famously love junk fees, so this makes a ton of political sense to try to delay this bill. And that's despite the fact that I believe there was a handful of GOP senators who support this junk fee bill. So what exactly were their main contentions on this? Because, as I was mentioning, this seems like it would be a pretty popular bill since nobody likes junk fees whatsoever.
Yeah, the idea is to bring some transparency to pricing. We've seen an increasing number of businesses that will kind of give you a surprise fee. I think in this case, Republicans are trying to stand up for their usual allies in the business community who don't want to deal with another mandate. But as you say, these kinds of fees are deeply unpopular. I think we feel better that when we're going to purchase something, a product or service, and we know exactly what it costs. So their objections are especially to, I think, the idea that the government fees are not included in this, and for instance, sales tax, and so that's the point they're making about hypocrisy. But I think that what they're really doing is they're just trying to slow down the entire legislative process and hoping that they can run out the clock. And even though we have not seen quite as much of this in the Senate, they've been Republican Senate has been running their own delay operation with respect to DFL Senator Nicole Mitchell, who, of course, was arrested a few weeks ago on a burglary charge, and so they've kind of kicked up quite a bit of dust with that whenever they can, and that has also delayed things.
So I want to talk about this idea and how the GOP is able to delay some of these bills, because as I understand it, this isn't quite like at the federal level where you need a supermajority to close debate, but what exact methods are the Republicans using to delay bills? Is this just essentially just extending debate for as long as they can, knowing that eventually, if the majority party wants, they can get this bill passed? Is that essentially what's happening with these delays that they're putting on?
Yeah, well, like I said, there's a certain number of legislative days. So if you can run the clock, you can reduce the number of bills they can put on the floor. And so there's all kinds of ways. If you can watch the House sessions, there are 201 House members. There's 134 House members, and roughly half of them almost are Republicans. So not a problem for each and every one of them to get up. They can ask the bill author to yield to questions, and you can really stretch out a debate for a very long time. And ordinarily, like last year, it didn't really matter that much. I mean, they still had to finish on time, but the bigger issue this year is those number of legislative days are dwindling, in addition to the Sunday midnight deadline. So it's going to be close. The only good thing for Democrats in this situation is they have such an unambitious set of goals they're trying to accomplish. Last year was, of course, a huge legislative year, and this year they came in with at least leadership came in with a slender set of goals, and so they should be able to make it happen. Particularly the public works bill, the infrastructure bill, which is known around the Capitol as the bonding bill. They do it usually in the even years, and that requires a supermajority. They're going to need Republican votes. And so this is another way that Republicans can win leverage, because part of it, an agreement on the bonding bill, on the infrastructure bill, could be let's not drag out debate here on these other bills, and try to be decent about all this, and let us get past what we're trying to get past here with our majorities. Yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of gamesmanship and theatrics here at the end.
Let's talk a little bit more about that bonding bill, because as I understand it right now, it looks like both sides between the Republicans and Democrats are moving at least a little bit closer. From what I saw, it looked like Minnesota Senate Republican leader Mark Johnson said that they've exchanged some ideas and are up to about $890 million. The DFLers are looking for an amount more in the 900s. So I'm curious how this kind of compares to previous years' bonding bills, kind of where the money would go, and whether kind of going back to what I was saying, whether this is a significant investment compared to what we've had last year in the bonding bill. Only bring that up because we had, as you alluded to, such a momentous session last year when it, of course, wasn't a bonding bill. So I'm just curious where the bonding bill kind of stands right now and what would be in it, since we do have both sides inching towards an agreement here in the final days of the session.
Yeah, it seems like they're on a path to an agreement. I expect it'll be smaller, a little less ambitious than the last two major bonding bills. There was one last year, and I believe but previous to that, there hadn't been one since, I think, the fall of 2020. And so I expect it to be a little bit smaller, and also they're going to have to include a number of projects that are in Republican districts in order to get those votes, and those are going to be the requirements in order to get that bonding package through. So I expect that will be also down to the wire, because everybody's going to use the clock in negotiations. Republicans certainly have big needs in their districts, and so they have reason to vote on this package, but they also are trying to use this small bit of leverage that they have. It's just about the only leverage they have in the entire legislative session to really get as much as they can, and so they'll be using the clock, knowing that come 11:59 on Sunday, that's it. So it should be some interesting high wire negotiations here.
Well, this is, of course, the last time we're going to be chatting until the end of session, since obviously the next time we do our interview, it's going to be May 21st, which means the session will be over. So I'm curious, outside of what we kind of talked about for the past few minutes, what else should we be keeping an eye on at the legislature during these final few days?
Well, there is a supplemental budget package. They do pass the major 2-year budget last year, but there's some supplemental requests. And so that's certainly something to watch, and a fair amount of policy. But like I said, the legislative leaders went into the session with a very slender set of goals, and of course, leadership has changed. Erin Murphy is a relatively new majority leader in the Senate. She had that role in the House about a decade ago, but she replaced Senator Carrie Dietzich, who got a cancer diagnosis or some bad news on her cancer diagnosis earlier, and so you just don't have the huge to-do list like they had last year, and so it'll be interesting. And then the other issue, of course, is that it's an election year. So I think that has also tamped down some expectations. I think that they want to focus on allowing the administration, the Walz administration, to get the programs they passed last year into shape and go into the election with a set of accomplishments that's mostly from last year. There's a tax bill they're going to decide on that it could include spreading out the child tax credit so people could claim it every month instead of all at once. There's certainly, I think backers of sports gambling would like to see that passed, but I think that the chances of that are just dwindling by the day. There's a fix for paid family and medical leave. There's some technical bills that they want to pass, make some changes there. We're following that closely. That could lead to a small tax increase to pay for paid leave. There's a number of other outstanding bills. But again, a pretty unambitious session. I think that the leadership, their feeling was, there's only so much that we can force onto the bureaucracy and state government. There's only so much change that they can take, and last year was a lot. And so they want to give them a bit of a breather, and then also give the voters a bit of a chance to kind of absorb all of last year's accomplishments.
You talked a bit about the fix that the legislature might need to make for that paid family leave bill. Let's talk a little bit more about that. If the legislature, let's say, doesn't pass that fix to the paid family medical leave bill, would that impact anything with that entire program, or is that something that they could put off until, well, maybe the next session?
Yeah, I mean, they can. It doesn't take effect until January 2026. So there's certainly time. The problem is that you don't know who's going to be in control of the legislature next year. There's going to be a special election, likely at least one, maybe two on the Senate side, because you have a member, Kelly Morrison, who's likely going to be in the U.S. Congress. So there'll be a special election to replace her. That's a West Metro district, probably pretty safe for Democrats, but you never know. And then, of course, Nicole Mitchell now, if she were to resign, and I expect and hope she would, as soon as the session's over, that sets up another special election. Then you've got the House, which currently is, I think, 70-64, so that's close. So they don't want to take any chances. I think that they want the tax to be slightly higher, and if they don't, then what they want is for it to be essentially 11 weeks instead of 12 paid time off, unless you can show you don't have paid time off for your whatever company or whoever your employer is. I don't think that's ideal. So they're looking to make a slightly higher payroll tax, and I think they need to get that done because they don't want to mess around with that if Republicans control one or both chambers next year.
And final question for you. This really doesn't have anything to do with the legislative session, but I want your opinion on this because Donald Trump is set to come to Minneapolis this weekend, or the Twin Cities area, May 17th. And I am curious, do you think any of the Republican leaders around Minnesota, talking about not just members of the legislature, but even members of Congress or other big GOP donors or people involved with the party, do you think many are going to end up showing up at that Donald Trump rally or trying to kind of keep their distance from this entire thing?
Well, certainly the congressional delegation has they've all endorsed him. I think that I can see Tom Emmer trying to. I don't know what the congressional calendar is like, but Tom Emmer trying to get back into good graces with the president. And he's the leader of the party. He's the nominee. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of prominent Republicans there. And it's one of those deals where it's one of those events where I think it's a gift to both parties. I think Democrats they want to remind voters that Trump is who he is and he's the top of the ticket. And a lot of this election cycle has been kind of a referendum on Joe Biden, and Democrats want to set up a choice between Biden and Trump, and so I think a Trump visit really helps Democrats remind the public who the Republican candidate is, and meanwhile, it helps Republicans rally their base.
And at least conveniently for Republican legislators, they can at least use the excuse that we're in session that day and we're not able to attend that Trump rally. So they're curious to see who ends up attending the Trump rally coming to Minnesota coming up on Friday the 17th. Well, you've been speaking with Patrick Coolican, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. Again, a great resource for Minnesota news and politics, and especially for following along what's happening during the final few days of the session. Make sure you go to minnesotareformer.com. Patrick, as always, thanks for coming on the show today.
It's always a pleasure.
All right, let's take a break and send things back over to Matt McNeil on AM 950.